Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this session on unleashing the power of data to transform your business. So just a brief introduction. My name is Shakila Kere. I'm a manager for credit innovations at FSD Africa. And joining me is Andrew Kolola. So I'll let him introduce himself. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Shakila. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Kolola. As Shakila mentioned, I am the Chief Executive Officer for IO Zambia, a mobile micro insurance digital services provider in partnership with MTN. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Andrew, for joining us on this. So on this session, we'll take you through the data management and analytics capabilities toolkit. So we live in a data world, and the genesis of this toolkit was, developed from a program that FSD Africa ran in conjunction with IDRC, which is the International Development Research Center, Canada, and it ran for a period of two years. And it was implemented in 3 countries, Tanzania, Zambia, and Sierra Leone. So the genesis and the formation of this project was that we live in an information world, and oftentimes financial service providers grapple with serving a market segment that they have no idea about. So in traditional lingo, so FSPs would say this low-income earners or market segments, the youth, the women, possibly displaced persons, they would call them thin file customers or no file. And what do I mean by thin or no file is the fact that they completely had no idea about this client segment. They had no data about them. So there's a lot of information asymmetry. But with the advent of data, with the advent of the mobile phone, so there's a lot of data on market segments that typically financial service providers would not deal with. Hence the genesis of the project data management and analytics capabilities. And we are also joined with Dr. Cole from the Sierra Leone Commercial Bank. So I'll just take a minute for him to introduce himself, then we can delve into the conversation. Dr. Cole, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Dr. Olin Cole. I am the project manager at Sierra Leone Commercial Bank, Sierra Leone. I've been with the bank for over a year now, at least about 17 to 18 months. And we were really excited to have DMAC as a partner in the projects that we've done. Hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that as the meeting progresses. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cole. So Dr. Cole mentioned DMAC. So we call the Data Management and Analytics Capabilities Project DMAC, and from here on we'll refer to it as the DMAC project. So it was implemented in Zambia, Tanzania, and Sierra Leone across a wide range of financial service providers. So in total, there are 7 financial institutions, and it was implemented by implementing partners who I'd like to acknowledge. These were OPM, Oxford Policy Management, which is based in Oxford in the UK, Axion Global Advisory Services, and MDM, based in South Africa. So as we delve into the conversation, so after we went through the process of using data, and by data here, we applied internal data, we use external data, and external data cover different ranges. So it covered third-party data, which is your MNO data, and it covered also research data. And what do I mean by research data? So research data is the data that is publicly and freely available, and that is it's from research initiatives by institutions such as the World Bank, who publish the Findex data. If you follow the World Bank and the Findex data, I think every 3 years, that has statistics on the financial sector. And then closer home in Sub-Saharan Africa, we have the FinScope data and the FinAccess data, which are published in conjunction with either the central bank, bureaus of statistics, and financial sector deepening offices across different jurisdictions. So in this project, we sought to work with FSPs to show them the use case and just to explain to them that there's a business case for using data, that there's a lot that they can benefit from using their internal data more efficiently. They can understand their own clients better. They can serve them more efficiently. They can ensure that they address their needs. And then by using external data, then they can better understand the needs of client segments that are felt to be hard to reach, too expensive, too difficult to serve. So we sought to prove the case for using data specifically for the product development cycle. So I will pose a question to my panelists. Andrew, we'll start with you. So as you went through the process of implementing the project through DMAC, how did you get to see the use case of data? How did you understand eventually that there's a business case of using data? And how insightful was that process? How insightful was it? Yeah.
Thank you, Shakila. So my primary or initial interaction under the DMAC initiative was with an institution or insurer called Innovate Life Insurance. Basically a startup at the time looking to bridge that gap, the gap you ably mentioned between obviously the more informal sector or segment of our communities or our market generally, which involves obviously the vulnerable groups such as young women and obviously the youth who traditionally don't have access to various financial services, and in particular, the insurance side of things. So from a demand side, I think it has been notable in our market, Zambia, especially over the past 5 years, that there is that gap with regards servicing. But it's not just on the demand side, first and foremost. I think additionally, equally on the supply side, and again, like you ably mentioned, Shakila, there have been gaps or lapses with regards how insurance companies or intermediaries alike that supply these potential financial services can actually service these particular large groups of segments. In Zambia in particularly, I think we're looking at a captive, a potential captive of around 8 to 9 million Zambians who are by and large financially excluded, first and foremost. So the case for data obviously stems from that fact to say, from a gap perspective, especially having been involved primarily in the supply side with an insurer at the time, I think it was inevitable or important that as insurers or institutions that provide these services, we now start to look at the best cost-effective and efficient way to service this huge market that is by and large untapped. And I think the most efficient and identified way of doing that was basically by trying to understand or collecting data and analyzing data or information generally that is basically speaking to this segment of people. And then, of course, from that aspect, see how we can come up with products or services that are more tailored, but by extension to being tailored, actually effective and receptive to what the needs of those customers are. So by and large, the business case, I think, was within that concept or within that aspect of actually servicing or the need to service this customer. And from a business case, obviously being insurers, the key issue would be what return, of course, or in this investment or in this initiative would we be looking at. So in the case of Zambia and in the case of Innovate at the time, I believe we looked at the actual numbers that I mentioned in terms of the potential that lies within that group, especially that penetration was still very low and still is very low in this country. And of course, the reasons behind that is because the traditional products at the time, or even currently to a certain extent, service just a specific segment. So the challenge basically, or the case to actually go into the use of data was by and large to gather as much information from a captive that literally nobody from a financial services aspect had any experience in servicing or knowledge about. So it was a no-brainer, to use that phrase, for us at the time to basically delve into this. And particularly, we looked at an aspect that was the key or the easiest, if you like, route to this particular segment. So in Zambia, again, when we talk about a population of 9 million or a segment of 9 million, which is by and large around half the Zambian population, and a good number being the adult population, it was an assumption that we made early on that being an adult population or an adult segment, these particular people obviously have access to mobile telephony with a very high penetration rate in Zambia. I think standing at around, I think north of 95% of the adult population have some form of a cellular phone. So already we saw the opportunity to gather some learnings and some information in partnership with potential service providers that actually are in that particular telco segment, if you like. And I think that has continued to this day. So the business case, again, I think was basically based from the need, from the demand side, but more especially from how, as an insurer, we could access information that would allow us to effectively supply what is required by this huge segment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Andrew. And I picked very key issues that probably Dr. Cole could speak to. You mentioned the issue of market sizing. So as I mentioned earlier, if you want to go into an untapped market, a market that you completely have no idea how it looks like, whether it's going to make business case for you, data at the very onset is the key to at least getting more information so that you don't go into a market blind. And I think you also bring about an important issue about client characteristics. So once you size that market, then that data also helps you to understand the characteristics of the clients within that segment, so you can better structure your products or your channels to serve them efficiently. Dr. Cole, so I know when we started working with Sierra Leone Commercial Bank, so Sierra Leone is a country that has a very high rate of financial exclusion. So I'd just like to get your thoughts from a Sierra Leone point of view and from a bank, the SLCB point of view, how you viewed data as you started this project and how eventually you came to see the business case for using data for your bank.
So at Sierra Leone Commercial Bank, SLC for short, so you hear me refer to us as SLC. Initially, we weren't using data as much. I think the DMAC initiative, there was a project that we did, the DMAC initiative for the Market Traders Association, which was to do a savings and loans product for them specifically. This was a project that the government was really highly interested in. And so when we started the project, we partnered with the DMAC initiative to work on that specific product. And one of the things we started looking at was to understand the demographics of the market traders community, which was a large one for us. And so with the DMAC initiative, they came about with the idea that we have to do some surveys, we have to go out to the marketplace, the fields, and gain an understanding of what the people want, what kind of market segment we're looking at in terms of demographics. And so that was an eye-opener for us because we never really thought about going about doing things that way. We just felt that we could take a traditional savings and loans product, tailor those products to meet the demands of this particular market segment. It wasn't until we started conducting field research and survey that we realized that, oh boy, there's a whole lot more here that we didn't know about, particularly some of the practices of the traditional market traders. We discovered that they have an informal method of saving, but only for short term, which is called the Ususu process. And with that process, we also learned about a lot of the challenges that they've had, such as safety of their funds. They couldn't rely on the Ususu masters. Some of the time, people have lost funds because of fraud and other things. And so it kind of changed our perspective on how we're going to look at servicing that segment. And so we started collecting the data, and we we did some specific use cases, which, I was really shocked at the kind of data that came back and what the data was telling us. And so with that in hand, we were able to take a completely different approach from where we started into shaping the product the way we wanted. Traditionally, as a bank, when we put out products, we look at the revenue side of things, how much the bank can generate from a revenue perspective, as opposed to how best can we service the clientele so that they get the service they need, how they need to work with the bank. And with the data that we collected, kind of, like I said, it kind of opened our eyes to a lot of things. One of the things that happened was we took a step back and said, okay, we now see some of the challenges that these guys are having. What we need to do is to ensure that we address those personal challenges that they face, as well as the group and community challenges as a whole. And with that, we were able to come up with a portfolio that is a win-win for both the bank as well as the market traders. And the good thing about using that data is it kind of shaped the way we do business and the way we go about developing products. So one of the first things that we did at the bank after that exercise was completed is we built a whole unit, which is a research and development unit, and also a product development unit that is focused on conducting research based on data collection techniques. That same unit has a data analytics subunit within it that analyzes the data that's collected. And that information is now used to feed to management as well as the product development arm of that team, coming up with relevant products for whatever market segment they're targeting. And once we did that, we also embarked on another project, which was a government project, where we used data exclusively to drive that project. And it's such a big success that we've now went to a second telco company whom we've integrated into our platform. So now we have two telco companies that are actually providing those services as a result of what we did with the data analytics on that project. And now, just yesterday, we initiated a third project, which is purely data-driven. In fact, we just came up with all the questionnaires that we're going to use and the various target areas that we're going to send people out to go collect. So we're really moving ahead with using data.
No, thank you, Dr. Cole, for that. And it's good to hear that there's definitely a business case for using data, and we're speaking from very different types of institutions. So Andrew has spoken about the insurance sector. Dr. Cole, you've spoken to the banking sector, and I know you mentioned telcos there. So there's also, it brings about an aspect of partnership, which we'll delve into. But before I get into that, so I just want to get a sense from you, because I know Dr. Cole and both Andrew yourself, you've spoken to using data for product development and how it has impacted your product development cycle. But before we get into that, I would just like to mention that, so data doesn't have to only be used for the product development cycle. So they mentioned the product development cycle because that was a use case for this specific project. But at least at the very onset, we wanted to demonstrate that there's a business case and a use case for using data, which they've both alluded to, understanding your market segment, understanding the pain points and challenges of your customers. And you could apply this to, as you form your strategy, when you decide to which markets to venture in or not. It's important that that comes from an informed basis rather than, just from sitting and having intuition that probably let's serve women. But do you understand why you want to serve women or the youth? You understand the market potential? You understand how much, what's the business case for that? Is there likely to be revenue from that specific market segment? So that's the beauty about data. It can help you in different areas of, your entities or your financial service providers business. Now, as we go into product development, which was a use case for this specific project, I'd just like to get insights from both Andrew and Dr. Cole, but we'll start with Andrew. What was so different? Because I know you've definitely developed products within your industries over the years, but what was that difference? What was the eye-catching thing about using data that was that aha moment for you? And as Dr. Cole mentioned, that you want to keep on using it and not go back to your old ways of product development. Andrew.
Thanks, Shakila. Yeah. So I think I'll begin from the very generic and high level. There's a saying, a common saying that has caught on in our country from an insurance executive angle to say, especially from my learnings under microinsurance master I took. It basically says that something to the effect that products or services or knowledge does not come from the boardroom. We need to go out into the field. And by that, simply saying, we need to interact a little bit more with our customers, or our potential customer segments, and just people in general. So in line with your question, I think that's the first answer I can give, to say that's the first thing that caught at least my eye, and I think the team I was working with then, in terms of how we engage or how we begin that process. So it was pretty much a bottom up kind of arrangement. So we would go into the field, and I think just like the good doctor mentioned, our interaction with the customers gave us a lot of eye-opening situations. We went in there, obviously, in those interactions with quite a few assumptions of our own, many of them which just crumbled once we spoke to these people and heard from their mouths what their feelings were with regards some of the issues that we were engaging them on, around how they handle their risk, for example, what they do, the basic things, what they do when a family member is unwell, how they cope with an emergency situation of any sort. It could be a death, it could be a sudden illness of either themselves and a child. And some of the responses themselves we found to be quite innovative, above and beyond even some of the solutions we had tried to think about in the back of our minds prior to engaging them. So for me, the first thing I learned was to go into these interactions, or to go back to the market and speak to customers, potential and existing alike, to understand what the pain points are. And in line with the pain points, one of the key learnings one of the key skills I think myself and my team at the time managed to pick up was the actual value proposition canvassing, where we identified basic pain points and just general needs and assessments based on our interactions with those people. And even the processes of actually analyzing that information in itself was quite intriguing. It was not the more traditional report writing, if you like, where one person sits in front of the computer and just basically jots down or lists down whatever findings they were that they got from a textbook or wherever, even on the internet. I'm sorry to say, but yeah, it was a more person engaged philosophy that actually, I think, changed my outlook on how businesses, especially in the financial services arena, should undertake with regards their abilities to move on and create new things. So data, obviously, again, is the key and the foundation of that. So whether it's of a research kind where you survey and you interact or you immerse yourself with these people, that is a form of data itself, and it's quite primary in nature and quite useful. In addition to what I alluded to earlier on, and I'm sure it will come up later in the discussion around actual internal sources of data, or data that is existing in a certain format with a certain partner, if you like. But for me, that was the key and foundation that I first and foremost appreciated. And above and beyond that, obviously, the process of actually now delving into what those responses are. So one typical example, obviously, was one interaction. We went into a marketplace with a facilitator at the time, and engaged with traders in that marketplace, specifically women, just to try and test some of our ideas, but more specifically and above and beyond that, just to listen to them And like I mentioned, just asking them how they coped with certain situations. And then, of course, once getting that information, referring back to them and asking them, would a certain solution of this nature be useful? Do you have something similar that you're already falling upon? So a lot of informal insurance going on in the market that even we didn't know about. And had we not delved into that type of data collection or information collection from the market, I doubt we would have actually even come across that at any point in time. So for me, that was a game changer and the key foundation into the next stages that we try to undertake, and the ones that I am currently undertaking with in my new role with my new team.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Dr. Cole?
Yes, well, let me start by giving an example of one area where the data actually impacted business decisions. So I mentioned that besides the market traders project that we did using DMAC, we tried applying the same principles to others. So the second project I mentioned was a government project. It was called the G2P, Government to People project. And we went through several months of product development and other things, and then applying data towards shaping that project and the business decisions that were involved. Initially, when we started, we weren't applying any data analytics to the project. We're just doing basically what the government has asked us to do. Until we realized that because of the market segment that we're looking at, given the government's mandate, we needed to see how we can broaden the scope of what the target audience is going. And for us to do that, we decided to go back to the field to understand what the people and what kind of approach we take targeting them with this particular type of product. What we found out was the target audience that we found by doing this data analytics was way much larger than what we were attempting to do with the government. And so what we decided to do from a business standpoint is we came back and we said, okay, you know what? We're going to find a way to pull this product out of what we're doing with the government and build something that we can go to a larger market with. And fortunately for us, and this I think happened by accident, the way we designed the product was done in such a way that we didn't notice at the time, but when we made that decision to actually take it out of the government box, if you will, and go for a wider audience, we realized that much of what we needed to support the wider audience was already built in. And so we decided, well, the thing we're going to do is we're going to pull that out because it's a larger market. And we had the financial inclusion mandates that we had to abide by. We decided, well, you know, this could help us in achieving some of our objectives in the financial arena. But also it will help us to increase our footprint in the marketplace. And so we pulled that out and we quickly went out to the market with it. And once we saw the response that we got, in fact, we were really taken aback at how people were excited about this product, which we weren't even considering for a wider audience. But surprisingly, it gained such popularity within the first couple of weeks. And so management sat down, we looked at everything and we said, you know, if this thing is doing exactly what we said we're going to do with the government target, why do we even need to go do that thing again when we have this product that can serve a much broader audience? And so we made a decision based on what the data was telling us to drop the original product that we had built, because the one that we extracted did exactly what that one was supposed to do. but from a much wider audience. And so when you look at our data analytics and just the data drives the business decisions, it's hard to think, how did we do it successfully without doing data analytics in the first place, right? I know there's a whole bunch of hunches and business experiences from my counterparts that are used in making decisions. But since we started using data, I think a lot has changed for us at SLC. Now, before we do anything, we try to do some amount of data analytics. We're not perfect. We're not quite there yet, but we're trying to do the best we can. And recently, we had one person certified in data analytics to help drive that process for us, so that there's someone who's looking at what kind of information we need and how do we use that information. How does the information help in some of the approaches we're using, not just the types of decisions that we're making, but also in helping to understand where we're going and what we have in a toolkit to make that happen. And that has been, a welcome change at the back so far.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dr. Cole. That's very refreshing to hear. It's good. It's actually good sitting at this end of the table to hear that, the project actually made an impact in your professional life, that you're still upholding the use of data. And I think that's just a testament to the fact that once you realize the potential that data has for your financials, for your financial institution, there's no going back. You can only go bigger, better, brighter, but definitely you can't ever do without data again. And that's the beauty about this toolkit. So I think you can all attest to the experience as Andrew and Dr. Cole speak, just the process, the iterative process that they went through, that there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of learning that they went through, and we tried to convert those learnings into the toolkit. So the toolkit is a step-by-step process for any financial institution that is seeking to utilize data in their business. So first, it's structured in three parts, and we've spoken to the first part and the second part. So the first part is just the business case of data, and this tries to explain the different sources of data that you have. So internal, external, research data, and just what you should be able to use for your business. And then also it takes you to the steps that will enable you to see the business case for data given your circumstances. And then the second part is the use case on how we apply data for the product development cycle, which Andrew and Dr. Cole have spoken to in tidbits, but this is more iterative, it's more holistic, it takes it from point A to B on how we can apply data, in the different elements of your product development cycle. And I know they've not talked about it, but even post your product launch, there's also elements of how you can assess the development of your product, and that can only be through data. And how do you embed these processes as you develop your product? And as we go into the final part of the toolkit, which is on data management and partnerships. So I'd just like both Andrew and Dr. Cole to speak to what is their experience, because I know Dr. Cole has mentioned working with government, and Andrew, you're currently working with MTN, which is a telco. So in part, essence of internal data could be your own internal data as an institution, as an insurance company, as a bank, as a fintech, but your internal data could also come from a third-party source, their own internal data. So what has been your experience in just how rich, or what's the value of partnering with someone else to get data, just to enable you to get a holistic perspective of a market segment, or just in whatever decisioning that you're trying to make? What has been your experience on dealing with third-party data, and also the partnerships? What are the challenges and the advantages of such partnerships? Andrew?
Okay, thanks, Shakila. I think I will begin by saying that I think after this experience, and obviously what we've been through, I am a firm believer that data is the new oil, right? If that's how the saying goes. I think it goes without saying that information is more critical, especially the times that we're living in now. And like you rightly mentioned, with IO and the partnership that we have with MTN, specifically in Zambia and across a few other countries in Africa, data is at the core of what we do, right from actually building the business case, like you mentioned, for any initiative that we're trying to roll out or service that we're trying to come up with to service a particular segment or group of people, right up to the actual post-launch, if, as you mentioned, and management or performance monitoring of the product, and obviously the evolution and changes that go with that. So in the experience that we have under IO, we are very privileged, obviously, to be working with an experienced telco such as MTN, who themselves have been in the market for a very long time, and by that association have had the privilege, or I should say, the honor of actually interacting or dealing and servicing with hundreds of millions of customers. And by that in itself, we're dealing with hundreds of millions of different people or individuals with different demands and different needs and different personalities. And the one thing that they have done to some point of perfection is to be able to actually use whatever information they have been able to get from their customer, be it as basic as something as simple as the age or even just the gender. When you have that kind of information at your fingertips, that in itself provides a huge resource for any business, and transcending even financial services, because I think what the telcos have been able to achieve, especially in Africa, within the past, within the recent, I'd say, 15 to 20 years, with regards the data that they have managed to amass based upon what they have been providing or the services have been providing. I don't think there are many industries that can boast that, even in the financial services arena. So first and foremost, any telco is indeed a treasure trove. In terms of the partnership that we are currently experiencing, and generally with regards that, I would say, because of that one key component, it's definitely a very valuable and a mutual partnership. As you may be aware, the telcos themselves generally are trying to evolve and create more value for their customers. The traditional services they have been offering in terms of voice and messaging are by and large being diminished by the continuing demands that customers that are currently they're onboarding, and a new generation of customer for that matter, who by and large is the millennials. So over the years, you've seen the evolution of their services to include things like data and internet services and those kind of things. So by and large, financial services is also at the core. And in line with that, mobile financial services in the form of mobile money definitely come to the core for them. So it's that kind of vision or strategic repositioning within the telco space that has also given us an opportunity in the financial services space to offer our own expertise. But as you may be aware, and I think we highlighted as well, and the doctor also mentioned eloquently, is that by and large, us in the financial services have lacked one key thing, and that's data and information to make our products scalable and also valuable and effective and obviously useful to the customers that we are targeting to provide them for. So that treasure trove of data from an MNO perspective or a telco perspective, like I mentioned or gave examples on basic gender segments, if you like, right down to actual spending behavior, because now we see people spending a little bit more with regards what they spend for talk time, or is it recharging their phones, etc. And also now, like I mentioned, data usage. So there's a behavioral patterns that are generally learning points or key learning points that can help financial institutions also tailor some of their products to not necessarily match those kind of spends or affordability, but try to create products and services that are easier for customers to adapt to based on whatever behavior they're actually undertaking with regards the telco activities that they're undertaking. So by and large, the long and short, I would say that any partnership that, especially from a financial services aspect, that has some kind of data component, and not just internal for that matter, some kind of external data access, because in the case of the telcos, we're not only dealing with the information that they have, there are various general statistics and reports that have been generated within the industry by regulators, for example, that help us also now, especially with some of the skills that we've acquired or I acquired through DMAC, to actually correlate some of this information. So it's one thing to have raw data, for example, from a telco or any partner, but it's the story that you tell with it. So it's also now a question of creating those stories in connection or in partnership with other data sources, which include, in some cases, even government statistics, general population or census data, just to see what we can reach or what information, what rich information we can pick out of those collaborations of data. And then, of course, see how, if at all, we can come up with something that will be of use to a particular customer segment. And another thing, a lot of the information now, especially again from a telco perspective, can be accessed in almost real time. So we have the privilege, based on the platforms that they have, to be able to access information that is basically happening as you are gathering it, if you like. So on a daily basis, there's always a refreshing data sources that actually provide refreshed data on a daily basis. In some cases, that same data, and I think in the past life, others have tried to do it, create actual dashboards that allow their analysts to see the evolution of this data or this information or their markets on a daily basis in real time. So I think that in itself is quite useful. But again, it's not just about telcos. I think partnerships in general, where there are huge captives and there's potential scalability, provide that opportunity. From a financial services provider perspective, we may be new on the market and growing, but in any case, at some point, we obviously will have, and we have already started acquiring our own data sources from our own data sets and our own experiences that obviously can be used in the future as well. So we like to believe that as much as we are partnering with the likes of MTN, we are, through these partnerships, creating valuable data sources or information that can be reused, if you like, or used to help the institution and the services evolve efficiently in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Dr. Cole, could you please speak to your experiences with partnerships? It doesn't necessarily have to be with telcos, but just from this data journey that you've just started and that you're leaving. What has been your experience with partnerships? Do you see them as adding value? Are there partnerships that you're thinking of to, to get on board in the future, just to enrich your business making process or your product development cycle?
Sure. Fortunately for us, we've done a number of partnerships in the past, and still doing partnerships. But the ones that are most prevailing are the ones that we've done with telcos, particularly on those two first projects that I mentioned, government project and the market trader project the market traders project was not with telcos, that was with government, with President's office. But the one that is most telling is the ones that we did with telcos. For the following reasons. Number one, we did not actually realize how much our customers were suffering. For those in the remote regions where the bank does not have it. And it wasn't until we embarked on those partnerships that we realized that our customers were traveling great distances to get to bank branches and offices and outlets. Were it not for that partnership, we wouldn't have understood that. So that was a great benefit that was brought to the table. The other two that came out of such partnership is the fact that with us being a bank, we are highly, highly regulated by the government. So the type of KYC data or your customer data that we have on customers is richer and more accurate than anybody else. And so when we partnered with these telcos, we realized that for us to do transactions, we have to exchange that data. We have to to send to them what we have on a particular customer, and they also have to send us what they have on that particular customer. And we realize that their data is not as clean as our data, because ours is government regulated. And with that, the telcos now are beginning to share KYC data on their customers better. So we're beginning to get to a common place in terms of the data that we use to conduct our respective businesses. So that's a valuable lesson that was learned. And it has been very tremendous in some of the things we're trying to do now. So if you look at some of the things the bank is trying to do, we're now looking at formalizing our data management approaches. One of the things we're beginning to look at now is investing more in data management tools and operations, particularly in the area of big data. One thing this bank has, it has been in existence for close to 40 years now, and it has been collecting data since day one. So you can imagine the volume of data that we have at the bank. So we're digitizing a lot of our data, our old data. And we're now moving towards looking at how we can harvest that data, not only to improve the business, improve our footprint, increase our revenue generation, but also in fostering partnership into areas that traditionally we haven't looked into. There's another project that is just about to start, where we're embarking on a partnership with a third-party company, and they're bringing to us some aspect of data collection techniques, which we don't know how we're going to use the data yet, but some of the techniques and tools that they bring to the table, they look awesome. And, they show a great potential in something that we can do in the future, which we're not quite sure yet. So I haven't begun collecting data yet, so we don't know what we're going to get. And we're planning to do this for different sectors, not just the financial sector, so that we learn how we can, build on that partnership and some of the things that we're going to do with it to help to promote our business and to provide services to our clients. So my experience using data, especially since I've been at the bank, has been an awesome. And the good thing about it all is that some of my colleagues are now excited about using data. So when we get into meetings, people are no longer talking off the cuff about things. People are actually asking for data. In fact, the problem we have now is we generate a lot of paperwork, as you can see, because we're collecting, an immense amount of data. So thankfully, we're trying to digitize as much of that data as possible. With that comes the task of actually harvesting the data, processing the data. So we're doing that. So the partnerships have been tremendous.
Okay. Thank you for that. So as we wrap up this session, I'd just like to highlight key issues that are coming up. And I think I like Andrew's quote that data is a new oil. I think undoubtedly we can't, financial institutions cannot ignore data anymore. So the time is now for us to realize the potential that data has in changing the lives of financial service providers and financial institutions more broadly. And I think both Andrew and Dr. Kola spoke to this, and part of what we learned in the project, you can't also look at the different data sources in isolation. So as you derive insights from your own internal client data, from your third-party data, from your primary data that you've collected, and from research data, your census data, your statistics office data, your Phoenix data, your FeedScope data. As you derive insights from that, you need to take a step back and look at it holistically. put the story together. How does it all come together? Because that's the key. You can't look at the data sources in isolation. It's important for us to note that key to successfully and efficiently using data and developing insights that are useful to our businesses is for us to make sure that we look at all the different sources holistically and we get insights that make sense and that can actually tell a story that enable us to understand, whatever aspect it is that you're looking at better and holistically. And I think just before we wrap up, just before I get parting shots from Andrew and Dr. Cole, I'd like to mention, just as a caveat, as we talk about handling client data, there's a lot of risk, especially when you deal with telco data, around data privacy. So it's also important within our jurisdictions to ensure that we are following the data privacy regulations that have been set, by our regulators, whatever jurisdictions you're in, and to ensure that we do not violate customer privacy. So to the extent possible, if you're sharing data between ourselves and telco, it should be anonymized data, such thing. We ensure that we're just using ethical practices and we're not violating client privilege, and we're also not using data to victimize our clients. So that's very key. So data privacy should always be at the back of our head. Speak about data, we should always make sure that we are not violating client privileges. So Andrew, as a parting shot, if you have, 2 or 3 words to tell anyone listening to this webinar, what would that be?
Okay, 2 or 3 words. For me, I think.
Yeah, or sentences, sorry.
Okay. For me, I think I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier to say that it's widely known and has been said that data is the new oil now, and it's data and information generally that is dictating whatever future any institution, whether public or private, profit or non-profit, has in terms of viability or in terms of meeting its goals going forward. We live in a very privileged time or era where this information, by and large, yes, could be at our fingertips by virtue of partnerships or business partnerships or third-party sources, but also the primary data itself is very, very critical, where we go into the field and basically engage people the old-fashioned way and speak to them. Secondly, of course, the world and the human beings being what they are, we are not static. We are very dynamic and evolving continuously and changing. Our demands and needs and wants change. And it's no different with regards what we demand or need where products and services are concerned. We're continuously changing and evolving. New generations are coming along. The way, for example, in our industry, insurance or the risks that were traditionally being insured previously may not be the risks that are prevalent right now or even in the future. So it's very important that data, that's the role that data now comes to actually help us understand and keep track of these dynamic changes. And of course, lastly, like you rightly reminded us, Shakila, we are living in a very dynamic world, and now obviously privacy and data protection is quite critical. And I think that cannot be understated, that in any ventures or any initiatives that our or anybody is looking to, or any institution looking to, I think that's the primary base to be within the regulatory laws that actually speak to these particular protection issues. And by and large, use data for the good and for the positive. And that positive obviously being to service the customer better, to provide better products, and indeed, obviously, just provide a better life in the case of the services that go to these people, generally going into the future. So that's the key thing. And in doing so, again, that information should not be used for other means. And of course, in doing so, it's very important that the necessary policies at institutional and company level, if you like, also enshrine this customer protection and information protection. So that's a stepping stone and a good starting point with regards seeing to it that people's data, and especially personal data, is protected accordingly and doesn't fall into the wrong hands or used unscrupulously. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Dr. Cole, parting short.
Yes. So for us as a highly regulated body, data protection is a big deal. Privacy. Our general policy is share none. So typically when we get into partnership, we start with the share none approach. And then once the request comes in to share, take a critical look, we involve our risk people and the compliance people. In fact, when we started our partnership, use the telcos, they were actually surprised at how guarded we were with our customers. But later on, we go to great lengths to ensure that we only share with our partners what is absolutely necessary to allow the business to continue. And that share none policy, although some have argued that sometimes it has held us back, but I think for the benefit and the good of our customers and the public at large, it is best for people on the outside to see the institution as being there to protect you. For me, that is more important than just doing things willingly. I'll add that as a policy at the bank, not just opening data up to anybody. Even the customer himself, when they come to the bank to access some data concerning them or their account, they have to go through some rigorous verification process before that data is shared. Because, people being people, you don't know who you're dealing with unless you start looking at identification. And that's one of the reasons why we're trying to automate all of that process so that it builds on the accuracy that we currently have in the manual process so that we don't make the mistake, whether an error in action of giving the wrong data to the wrong. So we're very, very guarded when it comes to customer data, including our own internal data. So in fact, that's even worse. So, but by and large, that's not going to stop us from pushing the envelope and looking for new partnerships. I think we're just going to take it one day at a time, one project at a time, and we determine what needs to be shared, how shared information needs to be protected. And even when we share minimalistic data, there's always an NDA or some legal instrument that governs that. So I don't think you'll come to SLCB and we open up data to that. A lot of people have tried and they haven't been successful in getting access to that data. So data privacy for us is a really, really important factor in our business.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being part of this session, Andrew and Dr. Cole. And I guess as I wrap up, it's just to mention that the toolkit, the data management and analytics and capabilities toolkit is it captures the experiences and the learnings, which were plenty of the process that we went through as we implemented this project. It's an iterative process. So if you're a financial institution who knows that data is important, but you don't know where to start, this toolkit is your go-to place. It will give you guidelines, it will give you direction in how to start, where to start, when to start, who to go to for help. So it's important. It will be of use to financial institutions and also to service providers who help financial institutions in the use of data. So if you want to use data for your product development cycle, if you want to understand the different types of data that your institution can use, this toolkit is a resource for you. So it is available on the FSD Africa website. We will include a link where you can then download it. Please feel free to download it and to interact with us in case of any change. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Dr. Cole, for taking the time to share your experiences. I'm happy that you are sold to data, that you are also using data and beyond the project cycle. So that's a very good That's a very good thing to note. And hopefully we'll get more converts, we'll get more financial institutions taking up data and embracing it within their processes. So we want a whole change management and systemic change within the financial institution, so that we better serve marginalized communities, we better serve women, we better serve the youth, we better serve low-income earners who previously haven't been receiving financial services from financial institutions. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for having.
Okay.
All right.